methods and results section, right? So it's the heart of any academic research article. So, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit, I focus mostly on the research article, meaning methods are done. You carried out your experiment, you've collected your data, you're analyzed it, or you're in the process of analyzing it. But I know that right now you're actually still in the process of developing your method section, so you don't have your results yet. So I'll adjust some of my comments to that as well. But when we think of that, research article, the empirical research article, it starts with, has an abstract, an introduction, methods, results, and discussion section. And methods and results is really where the article gets the most narrow. It's very specific. It's just about what you and your team have done, or you by yourself or with other people, depending on the design of your study, what you have done and what you found. And these sections are probably not the sections that you have to worry about writing it in the most eloquent way, right? This is not the part to really, there are some stylistic concerns, I think, that help your readers to understand the parts better. And I think that's really important, to be clear and organized. But in terms of the writing style, the introduction and discussion sections are what I call the more narrative parts, right? They tell more of a story in terms of things that are happening, the background, context, and so on. Methods and results are pretty cut and dry. What did you do and what did you find? And again, doesn't mean it has to be, you don't want to spend time revising it, but it is certainly not the section where you have to worry as much as maybe in the other sections about really the overall structure. There are some pretty set ways of doing this, and that's what we're going to take a look at today, as these rhetorical moves, structural elements that are pretty common for methods and results section. So let's get started on that. And before we do this, if I would like you to go to a website, and if you can do this on your phone or on an iPad, whatever device you have. I do this with my students and my postdocs a lot on their smartphones, but use whatever device you have. Go to this website, menti.com, and use the code 900497. And you should see, when you type that in, you should see a question that comes up that says, what have your experiences been so far with reading, and not just possibly, and writing methods results sections. Okay, so take a look at that. And oopsala, I'm going to go out here. Here we go. I'm going to take this out. This was and as you do this, we're going to look at this page together here. So just write in a word, 2 words. If I can get this right.
Would you please share the code on the same screen?
There we go. Do you see this, Menti 980497? Does that work?
Isabel,
yes?
Are they all writing on separate screens or the same screen?
They're writing on, it's going to appear over here, but they can use you can use a computer screen to get there. You can use your iPad. You can use your smartphone. You can use whatever you want to use to get to this page. Most importantly, go to menti.com. So www.menti.com and use the code 980497. If you go on menti.com.
What I'm trying to say is that if you give them a blank PowerPoint slide, they could write on that.
Sure, but they can also should be able to do this on here.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Does anybody have trouble getting there?
No, yeah. I'm there, and it said short answers are recommended. You have 250 characters left.
There you go, and just click on, whatever it says. I think there's a submit button or something.
Okay, and should I answer this question? What have your experience been so far?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Just answer the question, and you can put in multiple entries. Henry, you can participate as well if you like.
Okay.
And it's anonymous, so you can be as honest as you like. If you like, it's been the worst experience ever, which I doubt it will be, but if it is, you can write that. As you're doing this, I want to just check something here real quick. Make sure I have this all set up the right way. Yes, there we go. Perfect. I see things come in. Okay. Somebody's saying they usually start with this part, and I'll talk about this. That's actually really, really smart. Some good, some bad, just in life. Very good. How to get started, not so hard, yeah. I have found that a lot of scientists I've worked with over the years have had similar experience, as in like, this is a great part to start because it's you're doing it, and it's sometimes the clearest because it's really about what you have thought of you want to do as your study, and and the results, basically what you analyze the data, and it's pretty quote unquote cut and dry based on your results. So it is, I think, the easiest part to write. I've worked with some writers who love writing their introduction first, and whatever works for folks. But I really think in terms of maximizing your effort and your time, it's starting with the method section, and then the results section. You say, which results should I present? That, of course, is a question we'll get to when we talk about the results section today, right? Because you might have more results than you can present, and we'll talk a little bit about strategies in terms of how, and really what results you present depends on how you frame your research question in your introduction. So often you might start doing some research, and you have a certain research question, and you collect the data, you analyze the data, and you realize you have more here than for just one publication. And ideally you want that, right? I mean, ideally you would, you can have a large data set, and you can possibly publish more than just one article by focusing on certain areas, which then means you have to narrow your research question for that particular article. It's a long process, research papers. So I think it's a really good idea when you find papers that you think that are really, that are strong and that you think are well done, to use those as models for your own writing. And so you're all working in the area of ethics, and your research, a lot of the research proposals I've seen from you have to do with survey-based research, qualitative research, some quantitative. So find the studies that have a similar research protocol to yours so that you can adapt, and you can model your work after that. So I think everybody does that. There is really, you don't have to reinvent the wheel if it's already there. You might use a survey that somebody else used, but you might adapt some things. And we'll look at some examples. One of Henry's publications, actually, we'll use those, and we look at the intro and discussion section, and we'll see some examples there about how how Henry and his group have adapted certain surveys from other studies to fit their study design. So if you all, I'm glad to see this, that you're all writing, many of you are writing, this is where you start. I always suggest start with this section. So as you're collecting your data, right? And you, of course, if you're writing a proposal, you will, write out what you're planning on doing. And that might change a little bit as you start doing things. You might hit some snafus. You realize one thing you wanted to do isn't quite working, or you might need to do more, and then you adjust your methodology. But as you doing this kind of work really helps. Oh, and I think my camera image just went blank. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I don't know what happened. So my camera just crapped out on me. So sorry about that. This is weird. I didn't do anything. Let me see if I can start it up back again. No, somehow my camera is not connecting. So I'll fix it later. Anyways, so thanks for participating. This is really, and we'll do another slide of this again a little bit later. So let me go out of here and go back to the PowerPoint. So let's talk about method section. So it's a great way to start. Some terms, other terms that have been used, let me change the display setting here. There we go. Other terms that you can find in publications are methodology, or materials and methods, or methods and materials. The term methodology, I find, is used predominantly in social science heavy studies. So a lot of interdisciplinary work with lots of qualitative work, where a lot of journals ask authors to use the term methodology, but it's the same thing, right? So materials and methods is often used by a lot of bench lab scientists, you know, that kind of materials. You use mice, you use genes, you use people, whatever, right? So so methods, methodology is probably the heading that most of you will be using in most of your publications based on your work, but just those are other terms that exist. So I want to go over a few kind of major rhetorical moves and elements that all effective method section tend to do, right? Ideally, what a method section does, it provides this clear overview of what you and your research team did to get to your results. I mean, it's pretty simple, straightforward. The idea is really to enable other scientists to replicate your study, right? And so this is the balance act that some people struggle with at times. You want to make sure you have enough information in there that that somebody else can replicate your study, but you also don't want to give unnecessary details, because often reviewers will be like, oh, this is far too much detail, or they might say you don't have enough detail in there. So finding that balance can be challenging. And I think this is where it's helpful to have other colleagues review your work, maybe even somebody who is not necessarily in your field, because if they are able to follow the sort of logic of your method section and feel like they get a good idea of what's going on, you probably have done a good balanced job of presenting information in there that will enable folks to replicate it, but also not to include unnecessary detail. I think in the methods and results section, organizing the information for your reader with subheadings is absolutely essential. So unless the journal tells you not to do that, or it just, you know, you feel it flows well, I think it's a really good idea to use subheadings, even if one section is only like a paragraph long and you have a subheading for that. It helps reviewers and readers, but especially reviewers also, to look like, oh, this is the part where they talk about participants. Here is the part where they talk about the survey instrument. Here is the part about the statistical analysis they're going to, you know, they have used or will be using, depending if you're writing a proposal or if you're writing your research article. And if you hear funny noise in the background, that's my kid just running around in the back here and having a ball with something. Anyway, that is the toddlerhood. So again, organizing the information in the method section is really important, because if you think about it, and you probably had that experience yourself as readers, it helps if you kind of see the headings and you can jump back and forth. Like, oh, you know, the survey doesn't really interest me too much, but I'm curious, you know, what kind of sample they use. I kind of want to read them on the statistical analysis, because the survey I'm familiar with, I can skip that part, right? So you can give choices to your readers. One way to cut down on unnecessary information is when you use commonly used methods. You can just cite them. So there are citations that you can use citations in your method section. The citation heaviest parts of your articles and also of proposals will be your introductions, and then for articles, your discussion sections as well. Methods and results do not have as many in-text citations. They might have some, but not nearly as many as the first and the last part of an article, like, or the introduction for a proposal, where you really contextualize your work. But you can cite commonly used methods, and again, it's a way to minimize space and to, you know, really kind of hone in on what you're doing. Just one thing, and this came up the other day in a conversation I've had with a bunch of medical researchers, where one of the faculty members that was on a panel that we organized was saying that if you use a commonly used method, like a survey that everybody is using in your field, but you make changes to it, you have to make sure that you indicate to your reader that what kind of changes those were. So you have to spend some time with that. So even though you might use a commonly used method, if you make any changes to it, that needs to be clearly explained in your section. This might apply, well, this actually might apply to some of you, because some of you do clinical work, even though your focus right now is research ethics. If you have, let's say, and I'll show you an example a little bit later on from a large clinical study, if you have, a lot of, a lot of people, you do studies in human subjects, and this might even apply when you do a survey study, and you have a large pool of folks, a large sample, and you kind of dwindle it down to the surveys of people you actually include. You can use a flow diagram or table when possible, and we'll take a look at an example. It's going to become clear what I mean by that. But that's another way to organize information for your reader. And you might have noticed I talk a lot about do something for your reader, right? And by reader, I mean anybody who reads your work. I mean the reviewers, I mean the people who later on will cite your work, but also as you're writing, your colleagues within your lab, within your research field, within your research team. So that thinking about your audience, like the readers as your audience, is critical at every part of the writing process, right? And I think many of us do it sort of in the back of our minds, but when you really start thinking about it at the forefront and really central, focus on that, that can really help with, I think somebody was saying earlier, having struggling with what to put in the discussion section, how to organize it. When you think about what is the best way that my readers would benefit from having this this information presented to them, you're switching your focus a little bit from what am I thinking about it, but how others might be able to perceive it best. And we look at some strategies for that later. As I said, the method section is a very jargon heavy, or a more jargon heavy as other sections. And by jargon, I mean certain terms that unless people who are in your, people in your field might understand it, but somebody else might not. So for example, DNA or HIV, I don't think are jargon words anymore. Most folks, even the general public, know what that means. But something like, I'm trying to think of an example, like defibrillator, that might be something that your general public might not be as familiar with, or some specific terms. I had a good example the other day that a student of mine gave in a discussion that we had, and now I can't think of it. Oh darn, I should have written it down. But or computer tomography, like somebody might not be people in your field are familiar with it, but a more general audience might not. But in the method section, you don't have to spend as much time in explaining certain specific terms than you might want to do in the intro or discussion, right? So the method section can have a lot of jargon in it, and a lot of passive voice, rather than saying we did this, saying we analyzed the data based on this. You can say the data was analyzed based on, right? That's passive voice, where the person who's doing, or the people who are doing the action are not in the subject position of the sentence. We'll spend some time with active and passive voice when we get to our section on the writing principles next week. But I want to, kind of mention this here because I'll show you some examples soon where you'll see some passive active voice switches also in the method section. But again, it's a part, I think you're going to get more out of focusing on using active voice in this discussion and intro section than really spending too much time on it in the method section. And some passive voice in methods is actually okay because you want to have some variety. And we'll look at some examples this today and also next week. Any questions, thoughts, comments so far before I move on? All sound familiar? Yeah. Go ahead.
How many people are familiar with the distinction between active and passive voice? Sarah, it looks like you're trying to talk.
Oh, you mean from the grammatical point of view?
Yeah, no problem with the word.
Well, certainly not the political point of view.
Grammar.
No, you're not asking about
I'm not asking people to explain. Just are you familiar? How many people are familiar with the distinction?
I am familiar.
Okay, Saucin,
It's me also.
Familiar with.
I'm sorry?
Yes, familiar.
Familiar.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And now the next question is, how many people take what's the word I'm looking for? an intentional make an effort or an intention to use the active voice when writing, that you're conscious of whether you're using active or passive.
Yes, this is me.
Not very much.
Not very much. Okay. All right. That's.
I find like the passive voice sometimes more appealing in writing.
You find it more appealing.
Yeah, I know it is not right, but I feel it is more appealing.
Okay. Well, we'll dissect that maybe later on.
Yes, and you know, Dua, you mentioned it's funny because I've had this. I was doing a series of workshops like this with our postdocs and some doctoral students and junior faculty at UMB through School of Medicine, and we had a panel of some researchers from different departments in the School of Medicine talking about. I think it was about this. I forgot what section it was about, and I asked them about active passive voice, and some of these folks have been doing this for a long time, like 10, 15, 20 years, right? And so many of them were saying the same thing that you were saying, Dua. They're like, oh, gee, I feel passive voice sounds right compared to active voice, especially in the method section. So it was really hard for them to say, we surveyed 1,000 participants using this particular survey. They were much more comfortable saying participants were surveyed with this instrument, blah 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 blah. So, and we had this discussion about this, and I think there is a change that we're seeing in scientific writing, like right at this moment, that there is a push to use more active voice. So if you feel you're more comfortable with passive voice, that's fine. And again, in the method section, it probably is the place where you find more passive voice than anywhere else in an article. But it is not. It is good practice to really kind of develop a sensitivity for how much passive voice you use, because the more passive voice you use, the more likely it is that your reader will become disengaged very quickly. So it's, from a reader's perspective, it's always easier to read active voice because it's clearer who is doing what. So, but we'll have a lot of, there's a whole section in this writing science in plain English on active passive voice that we'll do some work with, and we'll see some examples. It's a great question, Henry. I'm glad you asked that. Because it is, my suggestion is you do want to train yourself and practice writing more active than passive. Doesn't mean you can never use passive voice again, so that's okay, Dua. You will be able to use some passive voice. But it's really important to at least be aware, why are you using it? Because sometimes it is, passive voice is the better choice, but you want to make sure you make that choice because it's a better choice for your reader, not because you're so used to it. Because a lot of scientific writing, however wonderful the results are and the content is, the writing sometimes is very poor. You know, and the readability of a lot of scientific writing is very poor. And I don't think it's helping, you know, really establish, you know, making science very popular among the general public, because it can be so, it can feel so disengaged. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Henry?
Yeah, two things. One, my own personal experience is when I finished finally with my formal training in medicine, and I realized that I didn't know how to write. Right? I had no clue. I mean, my college background was engineering, right? So that certainly didn't help. And so I started to take writing courses, and that was the first time I realized that there was a distinction between active and passive voice. So I went through a large part of my life without even knowing there was a distinction. And the other thing is, I think I'll finally get an article, but you know, 80 years ago, most research was done by one person. So when that person had to write up the method section, he or she had to use the active voice. I did this, and then I did that. And it's just like littered with active voice with research publications from 80 years ago. And then we went into this passive decline.
That's a good way of putting it.
Right, yeah. So anyway, so good. Well, we're looking forward to looking at more examples. Good,
Oh, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Let me go back to the slide here. I've been trying to figure out my camera situation. I don't know what's going on. We'll figure this out later. So this is from an article in the Journal of Human Reproductive Sciences. And I like this because the author presents a short table, and I've just copied the information of the table here. Just some important components of materials and method section. And again, this comes, if you look at the journal, it's a Journal of Human Reproductive Sciences, so it's obviously, you know, clinical work mostly. So you'll see that in some of the headings. But these are some common components that you can almost use as headings for your method section: study design, participants, ethical approval, informed consent, protocol, data collection, sample size, methods, blah, blah, blah. And most importantly, method section for research articles, when you submit your work to journals, is written in the past tense. Like this was done, we did this, it's all past tense. There are a few moments where you might use some present tense when you're referring to a certain method. So let's say we used XYZ method. This method is very common in blah, 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 right? Then you use present tense because you're describing not what you've done, but the nature of this method and some justification for it. Otherwise, when you're describing what you have done, it has to be in the past tense. When you're writing for a proposal, it needs to be in the future tense. We will do, we will analyze, we will distribute. You know, these surveys will be distributed. However you phrase it, has to be future tense because you're proposing something. So sometimes I have found when I work with writers who are writing a manuscript based on a proposal they've written a year or 2 years ago, and they copy and paste parts of their proposal in the method section, they forget to change the tense. And I'm like, what do you mean you will do this? I hope you've done this. So make sure when you do that you'll really revise and review your writing, just looking at past, and make sure that the past tense is consistent when you're writing your manuscript, because it has to be in past tense. By the way, Henry, just getting back to the passive versus active, I find that folks who learn English as a foreign language or not as a native language tend to have a better idea of passive versus active voice than most native speakers, because, you know, we have to learn this. I remember clearly in like 6th, 7th grade when we had to learn active versus passive voice, just FYI. So I'm not surprised you all are familiar with it. Anyway, so past tense method section for a research article, future tense when you're writing a proposal. Just some other things. This is another more global way to cover it. Again, based, in addition to this slide here from Hirke's article in the Reproductive Sciences Journal, you do want to always have something on materials, whatever you call it, participants or subjects, if you're doing human subject research, with all of you at this point are doing. What's the protocol? What's the study design? What are some of the measurements, dependent, independent variables, and so on? So these elements need to be in your method section. They could find themselves into headings, but not necessarily, but those are definitely things, as you all know, that have to be included and explained. I like to show this, this table, and it's on your handout, so it's a little easier to look at on there than necessarily on the screen. But I've taken this from an article by Ansley in Clinical Chemistry. So again, keep in mind, this is from somebody who is a chemist, not necessarily a researcher around ethics or a clinical researcher per se. So take some of these questions with a grain of salt, but he has written a series of 14 articles in Clinical Chemistry around scientific writing, which I think are some of the best short pieces around scientific writing that I have found so far in many journals. Really well done, they're fun titles, and so his approach to the method section is answering the questions who, what, when, where, how, and why. And if you look at the table, that's how the table is organized. And so there are sub-questions to each of those. So under where, where were the records kept, where were the specimens analyzed, where were the study participants enrolled, where was the study performed. These are great questions to use as a checklist. So when you're writing, and even for a proposal, right? This is not just, I think this works both for the stage for writing your manuscript. After you've carried out your research, you want to make sure you have information about this included in your method section so that your reviewers and readers won't have any questions. But this is also very useful when you're writing a proposal to make sure you're covering all your bases, right? That you define, under what reagents, methods, instruments were used. In your case, it will be survey instruments a lot. What type of study was it? Were the inclusion, exclusion criteria for participants? What protocol was followed? What treatments were blah, and so on, right? Again, not all questions will apply to each of your study designs, but they give you sort of a roadmap and a checklist to make sure, okay, have I covered all of my bases? And I really like this table. I'll have a link to this article and all the 14 articles Ainsley has written for clinical chemistry and scientific writing on the last slide. So again, I really think they're super useful. They're my favorite teaching tool, and my students in my class have to read all of them. So take a look at them when you have a moment. So sample subheadings. I just wanted to show you some examples from some random studies I've used. This is from a study from environmental health perspectives on decomposition analysis of black-white disparities in birth outcomes. So, and PTB means preterm birth because it comes up a few times, it's explained earlier in the article. So if you look at the subheadings under methods, one is birth outcomes, race/ethnicity, individual level predictors of PTB, neighborhood level predictors of PTB, air pollution predictors, and in statistical analyses, quantifying black-white disparities. If you look at these subheadings, it's almost like you get a bird's eye view of how the study methodology progressed, right? What exactly the authors were doing without having even read the article. That's a really great way of organizing your method section, using specific content, driven subheadings to organize your method section. So if I'm a reviewer and I'm reading the discussion section and it's some report around, how about race, ethnicity, I'm like, oh gee, how did I measure this again? I can go back to the method section. I don't have to, search for it. I can just go to the heading, the subheading, and find it very quickly, both as a reviewer and as a reader. So that's the kind of organizational work that as writers we should do for our readers, okay? Some more subheadings. This comes from an environmental science journal. CONS means coagulase negative. However that's pronounced, I'm not going to even try that. But you'll see, and they've used the numerical like 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. That is journal dependent at times. Some journals use numerical organizers for the different sections. If you like doing that for your own manuscript, you can. Just make sure that when you submit your either your protocol or you submit your research article, that you follow whatever specifications the journal will give you. So you again, and in looking at just the subheadings, we can kind of get an idea. This article is on higher prevalence of these cons among reclaimed water spray irrigators, right? So it's about reusing water. And so there's study sites, subject selection, survey, sample collection, isolation and purification, biochemical testing, confirmation of cons, antibiotic susceptibility testing, statistical analyses. You might notice that here at the end, this is a very common heading, statistical analyses, right? A lot of folks use that as a subheading in their methods section. Sorry about the stuff that's popping up. Survey, if you use a survey-based study, that's a very common subheading, as are the others. But these two, I think, you see them a lot in a lot of different studies. So again, just going through this list of like 9 subheadings in the method section, you'll actually get an idea of what was happening as these folks have collected their data without even reading without even going into the text. Again, that's a really nice thing to do for your readers. to give them that level of detail already on the in terms of headings. And I do want to say something about length of the methods and results sections or methods section in this case, and we'll talk about results in a minute, compared to the rest of the article. In a lot of clinical research as well as survey-based qualitative research, methods sections can be pretty long, and so can the results section. So the intro section, and we'll talk about this more next week, is usually one of the shortest sections or shorter, but methods can be pretty lengthy. In some articles, particularly some of the clinical studies I have worked with over the years, the methods section are by far the longest sections, methods and results. So again, it depends on your study design, it depends on the breadth of your study, but don't be surprised if your methods section takes up a lot of space. And it's the heartbeat in a sense of your article, because it's where you presenting what you've done to get at the results. And then of course the discussion is where you interpret it and analyze it. And that's what we'll talk about next week. Any questions, comments, thoughts so far about some of these organizational principles, some of the rhetorical moves for method sections? Any questions, comments? Does this sound familiar?
Yeah, excuse me, the statistical analysis is considered a subheading from the methodology, or it's a separate?
That's a good question, Sarah. It can be, so here it is part of the method section, right? In this slide here for this article, Sons of Total Environment. In the previous one, methods and statistical analysis were both equal headings. So statistical analyses became sort of its own section, which is I think something that this journal does, environmental health perspectives. So it can be journal dependent, Sarah. In general, this is part of methods, right? So this is, I don't see it very often as a separate category. It's usually embedded in methods, but sometimes it can be specified out. It also depends on the journal. It sometimes depends on also the level of detail in the statistical analyses, but usually it's a subheading within methods. It's part of methods. Great question.
So you should journal before starting writing, or no?
Pardon?
You choose, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
You choose the journal you want to submit in before writing, or?
That is an excellent question, Sarah. Yes. I mean, let me put it this way. Yes, in a way, yes. And my suggestion is when you start writing, even when you start thinking about your study, you want to think about, I want to say 2 to 4 journals that you might want to publish your work in. Right? So the thing is, something like this, if journal 1 tells you statistical analysis needs to be a separate section, it's easy to do that, right? Even if you've integrated your method sections, it's not going to be that big of a difference. So many of these are formatting more than content. Every journal will want you to have an intro, methods, results, and discussion section, some way, shape, or form. How they look, what they're called, that might be different. But it's always a good idea to think about, I want to probably say 3 to 4 journals, to think about 3 to 4 journals where you would like to submit your work. And it doesn't hurt to take a look at their guidelines for authors while you're writing, but don't feel like you have to write the exact, use the exact formatting. Really focus more on the content and on your analysis and all these parts fitting together. But let's say you have a study and you have a lot of different results, and unless you can't possibly report on all of the results in one article, but you take a subsection out, and that might fit to journal A more than journal B. So then you focus on what journal A wants and you format your paper that way. So you have to kind of do this dance in terms of formatting and organizing your work. It happens at different stages in your writing process. But knowing or having a direction of where you want to publish as you're writing methods and results, as you're starting, I would always suggest that. Henry, any thoughts on that? What has your process been that way?
in terms of the journals.
Yeah, when do you start thinking about which journals you might want to submit your work to?
Well, I do focus on one or two journals in the beginning, and as I approach each journal, hopefully it's only the first journal, right? That you have to worry about. But I usually change the style as I go from journal to journal. I find the hardest part with dealing with different journals to be the references.
Yes.
Because they
Yeah.
have all different wants and desires. And I just submitted a paper a few days ago where the journal wanted the endnotes to be like this Chicago-style footnotes where you put in ibits and all that stuff. And I won't prolong this discussion, but essentially there was no style that I could use in my EndNote library. So I had to do it by hand. So anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest.
You know, Henry, and what you're describing is, you know, is actually, I think, the plight of all academic writers, that you will find as you start publishing regularly that you will spend the most time. I mean, you spend time on writing up your results and, you know, discussion section, intro. That takes time. I'm not taking that away. But sometimes you spend more time on the formatting for each particular journal and then reformatting after you get reviews back than you actually do on the writing process per se. And that's unfortunate. So to get back to your question, Sarah, it helps if you know where you have your eyes set on one or two journals, especially this one journal, you might as well start formatting it that way for that journal. And then, you know, it's easier when you submit it. And then depending on if the journal says yes, great. And if they say no, then you can change, you know, gears, so to speak, and then think about, okay, what does journal 2 want? So they might want to have a different reference style. They might want different headings. There's some journals I've seen recently in some clinical research, they want the method section last. Don't ask me why. Some journals want the results and discussion section together, which is also fairly new development. So, you know, all sorts of things can happen depending on the journal. But, you know, if you have a roadmap in mind for one journal that you really would like to get published in, then by all means use it as early as possible. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? All right, let me erase my markings here. There we go. Sorry, my phone is making some noises. There we go. So just some examples I want to show you for commonly used methods, how some other authors have done this. So and you have these examples on your handout as well, it might be easier to read them there. But the first one comes from the same article from environmental health perspectives. Oops, didn't want to cross this out. But the black-white disparities. And so in addition, if you look at this, this quote, we developed an alternative, and, you know, notice how the beautiful active voice, right? We developed an alternative composite index of neighborhood socioeconomic environment that includes the same 4 variables, but in a single continuous index stratified in 3 groups. We followed a similar approach, and this is where the reference comes, right? We followed a similar approach as developed elsewhere, which is the citation right here, mixing a principal component analysis, PCA, and ascendant hierarchical analysis, and then hierarchical element, you know, they give some examples of what it is. We thus gathered zip codes. So they provide here, they provide some explanation of how, because they're following a similar approach, not the exact same, but there's the citation. And then the authors provide some information about how they adapted this, like we gathered zip codes and so on. And if you notice here, I mentioned past and present tense. Hierarchical analysis is a method of clustering. You have here the present tense, right? So, and that's okay because you're not describing something you've done. You're describing a you're providing a definition of what hierarchical analysis is, and so the present tense here is appropriate and the right thing to use. Okay, so just give you that example. And this is actually a really nice example of a very active, God, this writing with this mouse is hard. A very active passage. We developed, we followed. Hierarchical analysis is a method. We thus gathered zip codes, right? So you can use active voice in methods. And as a reader, I find this more appealing than saying an alternative composite was developed and, you know, was followed and so on. Then the second example here comes from the other article we looked at before, the Science of Total Environment, the water spray irrigator study. So it says here these isolates were confirmed. So here we have passive voice. I'm going to use PV as an abbreviation, by another multiplex PCR assay using a second set of primers against the same genes. These primers are described. So we have present tense here, passive but present tense, in Edwards et al. And Fang and Hayden. So and there you have the citation. So very straightforward. Rather than describing these primers in great detail, just, you know, they're telling the reader, if you really need to know this, go to Edwards et al. And Fang and Hayden. Bye-bye, see you later, right? So that's a way to save space by citing commonly used methods. Does that make sense to everyone? Cool. Any questions about this? All right. Let me erase and go to the next slide. There we go. So here's the flow diagram I mentioned earlier, another way to save space in your method section. This comes from a large clinical study. It was published in Drug Safety. So it started off with, if you look right here, with over 1 million patients. And then, you know, it's, you know, we're excluded, we're excluded, and so on. And it ultimately gives you here the idea, the division of, they end up with having almost 500,000 patients at the end, how these folks were divided into the different groups, different treatment groups, and so on. So rather than, if you had to write up all of this here in words, it would take a long time, because you had to write, we had 1.5 million, then we had these many. So you put this in a diagram or in this figure here, because it's called a flow diagram, and you can just refer to in the text as, you know, maybe you mentioned something, we ended up with almost 500,000 patients in this study that were divided into these 5 groups. See figure 1 for more detail. And this is where you send the reader to figure 1, and then the reader can go to figure 1 and spend some time with the flow diagram to understand what exactly happened. So you don't have to write up all of this in words, because there's other things that you want to spend the space on rather than doing this. Okay, and this might be useful. Flow diagram is useful for, you know, I think especially human subject studies, either clinical, in a clinical sense, or even if you do a large survey study, this might be helpful to organize the information that way for your reader. Okay, so it's a lot, 1.5 million people. I'm like, holy camole. So tends to use, again, I've already mentioned this, but there's just another slide. Just another example here. So you see the past tense, you know, physicians were asked whether they found it conceivable, it was omitted. Passive voice, but past tense, and present tense when you write about data, how data are presented, or general observations around materials. So nitrogen oxide species are the best available indicators, or these primers are described. We had this example earlier, right? So the present tense comes in for these types of descriptions and kind of ways of expressing ideas in the method section. So if somebody tells you there's never ever any past tense in the method section, that's wrong. But when you're describing for manuscripts, but when you're describing what you have done, that's always past tense in a research manuscript, and of course future in a proposal. Alrighty. Active versus passive voice, I've already foreshadowed this earlier. Again, more passive voice in methods and results than necessarily in other parts. So let's look at another example for passive voice versus active voice. So here, and this is also on your what's it called, on your handout. So first, univariable logistics regression analysis were performed, were associated, was dichotomized, were included, was performed, were calculated. There is not 1 ounce of active voice in here. Does this mean it was obviously published in BMC Medical Ethics? However, would it be nice to have some variety here? Yes. So maybe saying something first, we performed, and I'm going to write here with my mouse, so it's going to look a little weird, but bear with me. Performed univariate logistics to analyze which factors were. So maybe you can leave the passive voice here. Then you can maybe want to write something. We dichotomized, right? And I'm going to just abbreviate this here. We dichotomized the 5-point Likert scale into E as acceptable, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe use passive voice here. Next, all demographic and health factors were included. Manual stepwise was performed. And then we calculated, and you use your active voice here again. So you have a change back and forth between active and passive voice, which I think is better than just using passive voice, right? So we can lowercase o. It just creates some variety in this paragraph by mixing up passive and active voice. Maybe we performed, were associated, we dichotomized, were included, was performed, we calculated, rather than using just active or just passive voice. And so you would get a nice mix. So that would have been, if I would have worked with folks on this from an editing perspective, that would have been my suggestion, to maybe change some things to active voice. There are some journals who don't want active voice in method sections, and then you just have to do what the journal wants. However, I think more frequently, or we'll see this happening more and more, that scientific journals really encourage writers to use as much active voice as possible everywhere throughout the article. I've seen this certainly in Science and Nature, which are, again, super top journals with, only 8% of articles get published. But I also see this in smaller, more specific journals in certain disciplinary areas. So again, my personal feeling about active versus passive voice is I prefer active over passive voice, unless passive voice makes sense based on the flow of the paragraph. And we'll look for that, for this, what I call flow of the paragraph, next week. So keep that in mind as we go into next week to look at some more examples for this. But one easy fix is to kind of switch back and forth with some passive and active, if the journal allows you to do that, because again, it breathes some life into this paragraph. Henry, any thoughts on that? Because I know you have some thoughts on active and passive voice.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I've never had an editor comment on my use of active and passive, so maybe I've been lucky.
But you use a lot of active voice in your writing. I've noticed that.
Maybe that's the reason. Two, in looking at this paragraph, let me know if this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Using active when someone seems like the
sorry about that.
what you're doing is very active. I hate to use the same word to describe what I'm trying to say, and as opposed to a method that seems more passive. So,
mm-hmm.
Well, one, for sure, I always start the paragraph with active, but having said that, it seems like the first method seemed, and tell me if this doesn't make any sense. It probably doesn't, but it seems like the action is more active. You're analyzing various factors associated with public acceptance. The second one, dichotomizing Likert scale responses, seems kind of passive to me. So passive there is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then, maybe the next is, we'll go back to, well, it seems more active, where, it just seems to me whenever you do multivariate analysis, that seems, at least for me, a pretty active thing. Maybe because I don't sometimes understand it as well. and the last sentence, it's such a long sentence that, oh, not the last one, but the next to last one seems such a long sentence that maybe it could be helped out with an active.
Yeah. No, I think, I think you're onto something. You could probably do something right here. We, maybe you're saying we used,
performed.
yeah, or just say we used manual stepwise backward selection to identify the variable, because it's really about reusing this to do this, right?
Yeah.
So I agree with you. Active here is a nice choice.
Yeah, identifying. Seems like
Yeah.
you're doing a lot of stuff.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a bit better if you know who is, I mean, you kind of know who's doing it, the we, the collective, the folks who are writing the article, but it's nice to make that clear to the reader. I agree.
Yeah, and the last one, it just, the last sentence seems pretty passive to me.
Yeah.
It could be active, but it does, compared to the other stuff, what odds ratio were calculated. That sounds like pretty routine, passive type of activity. Yeah. But anyway, so if you want to have some method to your madness, that might be one way to go.
Yeah.
So
that's a good distinction. I like that, Henry. Like thinking about which of these actions do you feel are, driven, are more about taking action rather than just sort of some sort of standard way of doing things, right? So I think that's good guidance. I like that. Does that make sense to everyone? So what are your thoughts? Does it read better? Saying we performed, and then we included, we used. If you mix it up a little bit with some active voice in there, what are your thoughts? Dua is like, no, passive voice all the way. I'm just joking. and listen, a lot of folks would feel uncomfortable with this who have been trained for the past decades in using this. Well, let me put it this way: the passive voice, I think, has been used a lot because it somehow gives this idea of objectivity. Like this was performed, like, ooh, like, well, so by saying we performed, it just shows there could be human error more, but it's really an illusion because people are always doing it. Go ahead, Dua, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, what is interesting when we use in Arabic, we usually use active. We don't use passive a lot. Like it will in Arabic, it will sound weird if you use passive all the time.
I like the Arabic language. There you go.
So
and it's, what, Dua, and it's weird in English too, because in English, the English language has its, its beauties and its difficulties for somebody who's not a native speaker, speaking from personal experience. But there is something about, right, you always have this sort of, and you remember this probably from like grammar instruction, subject, verb, object, right? Tom kicks the ball. The ball falls on the street. It's really, the English sentences drive on having somebody clearly doing something to someone else or something, to an object of some sort. And the passive voice reverses that because the object suddenly becomes the actor in a sentence, although the object isn't really doing anything. And that creates some distance. So, in a way, English is that way too, that active language much more easily, it's more accessible for readers. Any other thoughts on this paragraph?
I just want to add that I have never thought about passive and active in relation to action. I usually think about what's more important. Is it the subject or the object? So since logistic regression analysis or Likert scale or manual stepwise or whatever is the most important part, I would start with them and then make sense that the subject would be the research team or things like that. So it's like a new concept for me to think of the action or what I'm doing in active way. I should start with active sentence more than passive.
But what you're saying, Maha, is kind of what Henry was trying to get at, right? So the sentence, the 5-point Likert scale was dichotomized into ES. It's really, the Likert scale is the important part here, because some changes, you know, this Likert scale was somehow manipulated. So having it in the subject position, even though it's passive, it's not really doing anything, makes sense, because you want to highlight that. And we will do some work, which is something I haven't done in a long time with folks, and I'm going to experiment with you on this, because I want to do this in my class this fall as well. And I was like, oh, excellent. We're going to try this out with Henry's trainees. And that has to do with, you know, where to put information at the beginning or the end of a sentence, and where to put the most important part of this, you know, what needs to go where in your sentence that you want to emphasize. So you're thinking along the right lines. But I do think that, you know, who is doing the action can also be as important as emphasizing what the action is being done to. You make that choice as the author, right? You're the one who ultimately decides, you know what, Likert scale needs to be, and this needs to be at the beginning of the sentence, because I want to emphasize that. And that's okay. But, you know, there's analyses, you know, I think it's important to say that we performed something, or we use this backward selection, because it shows also the thought process of the research team, and that's also important. So both things are important, Maha. Good point. Anything else, you guys? You also asked me about active and passive. Go ahead.
Yes, for me, it's also strange. I'm more familiar with active writing, like in law also. You have to mention who says what, who argues. We cannot say in a passive voice, you know. For example, we can say in one sentence, like, this argument was rejected by some opponents, but right after that we should say, for example, Professor Smith says like this. We cannot use very passive voice in legal writing. So for me, it's also passive voice. It's kind of you know, very vague. You know, for reader, it seems that the author is not very professional. You know, because we have to write very clear, like. Article 35 states that, so we have to mention everything, you know, very detailed and specific.
Oh, Golana, you are absolutely right. And I wish every scientist would, you know, hear this. It's about clear writing and effective communication. Passive voice, or the overuse of passive voice, hinders that, I think. Doesn't mean you can't use passive voice, like this example with the Likert scale. There, you know, something like that, you know, depending on, and I thought the example you gave was great, you know, and then, you know, the next sentence should then be active. So passive voice has its place, but it has been overused, almost abused in scientific writing, I find. That's at least been my impression. And you open any kind of scientific journal these days and you read some of this stuff, and it's changing a bit these last, I want to say 5 to 10 years, but even sometimes you open something up and you're like, and it's like your head hurts, and it's very difficult to even understand, like, what exactly is happening? Who is doing what, right? So there's a great example by, it's a wonderful book that was written a long time ago. It's called The Elements of Style by the authors Strunk and White. You can access it online because it's been, you know, the copyright has expired. So you have access to it on a website. I'll find it for you and put it in one of the slides, in one of the references slides in one of the presentations. I'll let you know when I find it. But it's there. Strunk and White give this example of the ridiculous nature of passive voice. So the sentence, you know, Tom kicks John. Poor John is being kicked, but Tom kicks John. Very clear who is doing what to whom. And there's the authors are saying the academic way of saying this is there is a kicking action taking place between Tom and John. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, who is kicking whom? We don't know. Is John kicking Tom? Is Tom kicking John? So sometimes passive voice can obscure and really hide who is doing what. And in science, I think it's really important to know who is doing what. Like in anything in life, but particularly in science.
Yeah, actually, Isabella, I had a problem with that because, you know, some of my papers was been like, you know, returned back to me with the reviewer asking me to write all the sections, like material and method sections, in passive voice, because I usually use we and he considered we as unprofessional way to present the data
Yeah.
or the way that we write the method. So
Yeah. You know, unfortunately, sometimes you're in a situation where your supervisors tell you that, and you just have to follow their rule. But just know that they're actually not right. This is nothing about professional versus unprofessional writing. It's about conventions. And some people are really holding on to this convention of this passive voice as a sense of measurement of objectivity, which I think is incorrect, and it's actually misleading. Because there's no, I mean, we're always subjectivity in every research design. You can't avoid it. We're human beings. We're trying to minimize it as much as possible. So I think it's much more honest to use the we. And personally, I think that's more professional. But that's, you know, again, if you want to get published in a journal and they tell you to write everything in passive voice, well, I guess either you're going to accept it, or you're going to just say, whatever, you know what, I don't want to do this. I'm going to go to a different journal that accepts a more active style of writing, right? I mean, as an example, that's a little extreme, but yeah. Henry, would you say that's changing the use of more active voice in sort of research writing? And
Yeah. No, I think it is changing, and uh, and so it's good to see that.
Yeah.
So I mean, you took this recent example 4 from a paper published in 2019. So,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Has anyone done a linguistic analysis of scientific papers?
Yeah, there are many. There's some corpus analysis on passive and active voice. I think I have a few articles on that. I can make them available to folks if you're interested.
Oh, okay. All
So
right,
there
good.
certainly is. People are doing work on this. Yes.
Oh, all right, good. All right.
Yeah, I have them somewhere in one of my many folders, but I'll unearth them. I remember reading them a while ago. Yep. It's funny, I find sometimes, for those of you who might do work with psychologists, sometimes psychologists are the worst with passive voice, and some social scientists, because I think they have a chip on their shoulder of like, well, you know, we're not as real of a science as, I don't know, biochemists or medical researchers, so we got to even, you know, present objectivity more, you know, more adamantly by using passive voice. I have had arguments with psychology writers to where I'm like, this just sounds awful. They're like, well, that's the way we have to do it. That's the way it is done. I'm like, right there, you know, there you get your passive voice. So that's changing as well, but I find that sometimes certain psychology journals are the ones who are most resistant towards changing, you know, passive voice, because they really feel it's a measure of objectivity.
Okay,
so,
there you go.
There you go. All right, I'm going to leave these annotations in here. So here is an example, also from 2019. Same journal, but a lot more active voice. So the journal obviously is fine with you using active voice, right? So here's the first question asked. So the question becomes the actor, right, which is fine. How often in the 2 last years physicians, taken out of context for you, so had encountered ethically challenging situations? And no surprises about an ethical article. To answer these questions, we asked them, right, active, to check a list of predefined situations. The development of this question had a sequential exploratory mixed method design. So again, active voice. That is some explanation. We first collected qualitative data in order to develop and so on. So everything here is active. Yay! I like it, right? So it's possible. It's possible. You can have passages that are all active even in the method section. And again, some doesn't mean that you can't have a passive constructions here and there, but focusing on really prioritizing active voice, I really think makes your writing more readable than not from a reader's perspective. So here we are, all active, yay. So go back to the Menti site and type in the same code while I'm going to go out of presentation mode here. You should still see this. This always happens. Yes, I want to keep the annotations. Here we go. So the question, just quickly, what's your biggest takeaway so far about writing an effective method section? So what's the thing that kind of like really popped for you so far? You know, we're a small enough group. If you want to rather talk about it, that's fine by me as well. If you want to type it up, that's okay too. I'm going to go into the next slide here. There it is. I don't know what this all means. Actually, let me do this. Here we go. I think it's better to see. Ignore my things that come up here. Henry, are you participating too?
Yeah, I got confused with the code.
Oh, yeah.
I see something on the bottom there, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't know what this means either. This is kind of a new thing. I don't know what the heck is going on. So subheadings, yay! I know. I really think it's if that's the one change you make and you continue to do it, it's really helpful for your reader, and your reviewers will thank you for that in particular, because it'll make it easier to get through a lot of information. Proper order, yep. Subheadings, yeah. Repeatable. Cool. Very good. Active versus passive, I know we've talked about it. I'm very passionate about active voice, but I also know I've had so many writers sometimes come to me say, oh my God, my English 101 instructor, which is a course that a lot of undergraduates take in their first year, so basic composition course, they told me to never use passive voice. And I'm like, no, that's not true either. So whenever somebody tells you to never do, well, in most cases, when it comes to writing, somebody tells you never do this, always do this. You can, or especially you could never do this. You might want to take that with a grain of salt, because there are few absolutes, and writing, language are all subject to change over time. So like my favorite rule that people throw at me sometimes is like, don't ever end a sentence with a preposition, like not end it with or off. I'm like, that's not grammatically relevant. Right? So it's perfectly fine to end a sentence with a preposition. It's just a stylistic choice, and it's a cultural convention that has its own history, but it is not, that's all it is. So few absolutes. Awesome. So good. I'm glad you find the subheadings. I think that's really, it's helpful to, it helps you organize your own writing, but it's also really great for your readers. I'm going to go out of this one and back to the PowerPoint. And we are going to results. How are we doing in time? Yeah, we might not get through all of this, but that's okay. Any last comments on methods section? I'm going to change the display setting again here. Henry, any last words on methods?
No, except for I'm going to share this paper with everybody, and I'll send it to you as well. And I've read in several papers saying that if you're having difficulty writing a paper, the methods and the results sections are the easiest to write. So there is a method to starting out. Yes. Talking about methods and results.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's absolutely true, especially for such data-driven research where you have a proposal, you're collecting the data. Start off with that. It sometimes can really help you get over the hump. And writing is always challenging. So it's never, I never find writing easy, but it's, this is just basically like, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. And then you can always go back and revise for like, nice sentence structure, whatever, but just get the stuff on paper, what you've done, and then what you found. And then when we get to discussion introduction, you have to do a little bit more thinking around organizing, selection, and so on. But methods and results are fairly straightforward.
So I will add that since we have to submit proposals to the Research Ethics Committee, you already have your introduction and methods section written up.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Your introduction sections might change though once you get your results.
Oh yeah.
But you're right. You have. It's a great way to start. And I was talking about this with some students the other day. I'm doing some scientific writing work with some undergraduate students in environmental science over in College Park, and we were talking about sort of intro results. What was my point here? And my colleague who's a postdoc who runs this project, who asked me to do these workshops with them, she was saying that, when you're working, and this is particularly true for these folks who are usually in labs that are funded by NIH or other grants from other institutions here in the United States, be it a federal, governmental institution like the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, or the Department of Agriculture, depending on what kind of work you do. So there's, when you then as a postdoc or as a grad student might work on a data set yourself for your work, and you write the methods and results, and you do some discussion work, and then you get to the introduction, you can often pull a lot from the grant that was written for this particular project, right? Because what goes into the grant, that already kind of gives an idea of the overview. And it's the same thing for a proposal. So you have to adjust some things, right, depending on what focus you take in this research manuscript that you're working on. But you have already something to start off with. So in a way, the discussion section is probably the hardest one. You have something for the intro. Methods and results are fairly straightforward. Discussion section, and we'll talk about this the next time we'll meet next week when we talk about intro and discussion. It really is, and we're going to talk about discussion before we talk about introduction, so we're going to reverse that. The discussion section really is by far, I think, the hardest, for many writers, the hardest one to write. Wouldn't you say so, Henry?
Yes, right. And absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's normal. So if you feel that way, no, you're not alone. And we'll look at some ways to maybe make it a little easier or more structured, that you don't feel quite so lost, by looking at some examples.
Let me also add, the discussion section requires the most component. I'm not saying that right, but mostly analytical thinking.
Yes.
And what could I say? We as a group don't feel comfortable with analytical thinking, putting our thoughts in a logical, presentation. Whereas the methods there's no analytical thinking involved in that, as well as the results. I think that's the reason why. But one thing that I'm going to go over this afternoon, we're going to discuss about the, picking out a research problem. And one of the things I'm going to emphasize, actually, that's what goes into your introduction. Why are you writing this paper, or why did you do this experiment? And that essentially is what the introduction is all about. But anyway, but you're right. The discussion is the hardest to tackle.
Yeah. And so I'm glad you're doing it this afternoon, Henry, because that'll pick up nicely with what we're going to talk about with the introduction next week. So that's perfect.
Good.
So let's talk about the results section. The suggestion I often hear from folks is, before you've written your method section, you have your results. you want to start preparing tables and figures first. And this is particularly true for clinically driven research or research with, like many of my, I've worked with some folks in environmental science, so kind of lab, sample analysis and so on of, different, cells and whatever. But I think this is true also for survey-based qualitative research. So think about, or at least think about what tables and figures would you want to present based on the results, because that can really help you determine not just what goes in the results section, but also what ultimately goes in the discussion section. So there is an intimate connection between all four parts of a research article, but there is a really neat kind of connection between the results and the discussion, because in the results section, of course, you present what you found, and in the discussion section, you present the analysis. So there will be an overlap. So if whatever work you do on the results section can also pay off for the discussion section. So once you've looked at the tables and figures, you can step back and ask yourself, what's the big picture here? What are the major trends? What relationships are evident? And that's what you want to report on, right? You ultimately want to summarize what the data show. And so make sure that you present data and the results. So not just, 40% whatever, but also, the results that go with it. Now, as you do tables and figures, make sure you not just repeat numbers that are already in tables and figures. So in your writing, in the written part of the results section, highlight some key numbers when appropriate, and let readers themselves go to the tables and figures for more details. I'll show you a few examples in a second, but that's a really key move in a results section. Similar in a method section, think back to that flow diagram I showed you. Like, you don't want to write up everything in that diagram. You're just going to refer to it and maybe highlight some the major progression of how you selected your, in this case with a Taiwanese study, 500,000 people, but you don't have to write all the detail into it. The same thing for the results section. You use your tables and figures as supplemental information. You just highlight the key numbers and key findings. I wanted to show you what Hirche wrote about in the Journal of Human Reproductive Sciences as important components of the results section. This author had a table in there. So, anything about sample size with details of exclusion, basic characteristics of the samples and demographic data, main results in tables, figures with brief description in text without any interpretation. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more today and also next week. The results section should reflect the materials and methods section. And by that is basically, there could be a mirroring effect. So let's say you have the structure of the materials and methods, how you've done things, at this is the experimental kind of strategy you've used. The results section can mirror that, right? If you have any secondary results, a post-hoc analysis, for example, should be given separately. And you also write this in the past tense, right? There's past tense. There's some present tense in results, and we'll talk about what they are in a second, but it's mostly written in past tense. We found that, blah, blah, blah. I do want to mention some reporting guidelines, and there are some guidelines that they differ based on study type and to a certain extent discipline. These guidelines are great checklists for researchers. Some even come in checklist format, and we'll click on one in a second. Editors and reviewers use these checklists when evaluating manuscripts. So in a way, if you use them to write your results, you're already ahead of the game. So I wanted to show the CORAC reporting guideline, which the abbreviation stands for Consolidated Criteria for Reporting Qualitative Research. So let me click on that. Yeah. I don't know if it's, so can you guys all see that? Yes. So here you see that? Great. So you have, study design and so on. So you'll have some, so just to show you what the checklist looks like, that can be helpful for this section too. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. Let me see, let me go on tab. So again, the link is there for you guys to look at. There's also the CONSORT checklist for Consolidated Standards of Reporting Trials. That's what the abbreviation means, usually for randomized control trials with a flow diagram. So just some additional resources for you to take a look at. Again, I want to come back to my favorite writer about academic writing, scientific writing, Ainsley, in clinical chemistry. And he calls the results section, show your cards, the results section in the poker game. There's these kind of cutesy little titles, which I can never think of. But he basically says there's 4 major ways you can organize the results section, which can then also drive your discussion section to a certain extent. So one way is you can present the results in chronological order based on how you derived at them, based on how you went through your methodology. You can group them by topic or experiment, depending on the nature of your study. You can also present your results general to specific, or most to least important. I think the most frequent one I see on a regular basis is the chronological order. And it makes sense, right? I mean, you kind of present the results the way you've derived at them. But depending on the complexity of your study, these other 3 might be useful as well. So you have those options as well to do that.
Let me just add, it seems like the chronological order is probably more useful for bench research.
Probably, yes.
And I'm looking at general to specific, and I'm thinking of social behavioral research, like when you have survey studies. So you first describe the demographics, and then think of the title of surveys that we do, KAP, knowledge, attitudes, practices. Even though many times the P gets changed to perceptions, but think about knowledge, attitude, practices. It just seems like you're building a story that's reflecting the importance of each of those factors towards behavior. So, you have knowledge, you have perceptions. Now you're getting into heavy duty attitudes, and then you report on actual behavior. And then, this is probably reflecting more of my style. And then I say for last, the heavy duty statistics, which would be logistical regression. I save that for last, but that's interesting about thinking about the order of the results section.
Yeah.
So, okay, good, great.
That's a good observation, and I agree with you. I think that's certainly true. Chronological order seems to be a lot of bench research, lab-based research, even clinical research, where you're right, the social sciences lend themselves more to sort of a thematic organization rather than a chronological order. Yeah. I think it's certainly true of the studies I've read that you have done. You totally do that. And I think it works really well from a reader's perspective, right? I mean, completely, it makes sense. So just know that these options are available. If you want to take a look, I think Ainsley gives some examples in the article, in his article. Again, all of these articles that he wrote are maybe 2 pages long, 3 pages. They're not very long, but they're very pithy and to the point. So again, check them out if you can. Any thoughts on this, comments, questions? Okay. Some more, just summarizing some of the things we've talked about. Subheadings also in the results section are a good idea. So in most cases, they are thematic, and we'll look at some examples. Highlight differences between results and percentages in text if given in absolute numbers in tables. So again, kind of the switching back and forth between tables and the text. Highlight, repeat only the most important numbers. Again, you don't have to write everything in there. That's why you have tables and figures. Include negative control results if they're available, depending on your study design, right? And this is important, and I think it's a pet peeve of a lot of reviewers, is when you're writing in the results section and you use the term significant, really try to use it only when you're referring to statistically significant results, because otherwise it can be confusing. Use important or some other synonym for significant, but the actual term significant, use that only when you're reporting on results that have some statistical significant component to it, like with a p-value or whatever it is. Okay, and I think it just is a little change. Just, you know, you might use significant throughout the results section, not noticing it, but when you're revising, you know, revise for making sure that you use significant only in that context of statistical significance. It will make it easier for your reader to, you know, not have to kind of think too much. And again, some reviewers really can get hung up on that, what I've seen in some people's comments. Anything related to why you did something belongs in the method section with one exception. And that's an exception. Let's say you, in your method section, you describe what you've done. And let's say when you, and this probably applies more to lab or bench research than necessarily social science research, but not necessarily. Let's say you've gotten a certain result, as you know, you've new methodology, you do your you do your study, and you get a certain result, and you realize, holy something, this is really interesting. I think we need to run another test. And you received the results you didn't expect, and you realize, oh, I got to go back and do something else, maybe another focus group, whatever. Again, this is mostly because probably to bench and lab research, but it could happen in a social science context or in a survey study context too. If that's the case, then you can report about it in the results section. So based on this result, we decided then to do this, and it's the result that we found. Otherwise, anything about why and how you did something goes to the method section, not the results. Does that make sense? So again, if you have a result that really forced you or directed you towards doing another, run another test, run another something, do something else based on that result, that can go in the results section. Otherwise, that's reserved for that kind of description of how and why you did something goes into the method section. And then this is really the common, any question, any thought? Do you hear somebody? Okay. This is really, really important, and we'll talk more about this when we get, we will revisit this when we get next week to the discussion section. Any comment or thinking or writing about the meaning of the results here, the analysis, what do the data mean versus what they show, goes in biomedical and social science journals, goes into the discussion section. So the results are really just reporting out. That's really, really important. That's a very common convention in almost all research-based journals, both in biomedical and social sciences. However, there has been a move by some researchers. I've read a book the other day on science writing that I really liked by, I think, a Norwegian or Scandinavian researcher. I think he's from Norway, but I'm not 100% sure. He's a computer scientist, and he really hates the fact that results and discussion sections are separated, because he feels we should talk about what the results mean when we present the results. And so there are some journals where results and discussion are conflated. They're put together, they're one section, but that is not the norm. The norm is that division between what do the results show, what does the data show, versus what does data mean, and you compare your data to other people's data and so on. We'll talk about, again, more about this next week in discussion section. But know that that's the convention, but there also, you might come across a journal occasionally that will ask you to combine results and discussion section. Henry, have you come across this in your social science survey-based research on research ethics?
I've haven't seen much of combining results and discussion. I've seen people saying that makes more sense, but having said that, I do believe, you know, just present the facts first and then discuss it. And when you said that point about using significant, reminds me that I tell people, don't editorialize the results by using words that gives the sense that you're evaluating the results right then and there. Even the simple thing, when you're reporting on quantified data, when you're saying many participants said they agree with blah, 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 and then you say, whereas only, whatever, said this. And I think a lot of times the word only gives a hint of editorializing when you use the word only as opposed to saying fewer. Is that making sense to you? I mean, only to me, it says you're editorializing that, gee, there was so few that said that seems really significant, as opposed to using fewer. So, but the basic point is not to use, not to comment on the significance of the results. I think it's better left to just be just be neutral in presenting the results.
I agree. I like the phrase you used, editorializing, that shouldn't go into the results section. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Let me see. It's 11 o'clock. We have a few more slides. Do you want to push through, or do you want to leave those for the next week? Or just
what are you talking about? 10 minutes?
Yeah,
like
10 minutes at the most.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, Henry says it's fine. Sorry, guys. Alrighty. So let's just to show you some more subheadings. This comes from this from another the BMC Medical Ethics Journal on clinical ethics dilemma in low income setting. So you see the subheadings in it's a survey-based study, I believe, from what I remember. It's a these are the subheadings in the results section. So you see a lot of subheadings, and if you look at them, there's the respondents, dilemmas experience, result from qualitative analysis, dilemmas concerning resource scarcity, responsible for providing, dilemmas. So a lot of really content-driven subheadings in the results section, based on, and I can guarantee you that the way this I haven't read this in a while, but I remember reading it when I prepared this a while ago. This results section, it was the organization was definitely most important to. It wasn't a chronological presentation, right? It was thematic in a sense, and you can see that reflected in a sense in the, there's some level not of interpretation going on, but of organizing a large, data set of qualitative research based on these dilemmas and so on. So you'll probably, and I remember in the discussion section for this article, all of this language comes back and the readers get a really clear idea of what these different dilemmas mean in the larger context of the work in this field, right? So subheadings are also a great idea in the results section. I find, because you're presenting a lot of material. It's a little dry because you're just presenting sort of the facts. So it's not, you're not providing too much context there yet, because that's the discussion section. So helping your reader get through this material effectively via subheadings is a good idea. Here's another example. This comes from the Science of Total Environment, the environmental study on water spray irrigators. So only 3 subheadings. This was a fairly straightforward study. This results section the whole article wasn't very long. You see 35 to 40 pages, so pretty pithy and to the point. So you have 3 subheadings, but they're also organized thematically to, again, give the reader a little bit of guidance on what the results are saying. And of course, the discussion picks up a lot more on this. Just an example here, summarizing info from tables. This comes from another study, environmental research. I've done some work recently with this environmental research stuff, and I really liked some of the articles that they were using. So here you have, so the precursor and product ions data, and I think you have this on your handout as well, blah, 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 presented in table 1. Most of the analytes, and so you see, so again, the content is very specific, but it's about these different analytes that are all here, and they're only highlighting a few of them, right? So here's the reference to table 1. So the LOD ranged from this to this in general, and then you have, so you have whatever that's pronounced, and oxacillin. They're highlighted, right, because they're sort of the outliers. And then the majority of recovery rates were in the range of something with a noted, and then again, the exception of oxacillin, and try this one right here. So these three are mentioned in this little paragraph, and that's it. The rest is basically see table 1 as presented in table 1, right? And that's a great way to do that first table 1, a general overview of, often in social science research, it's demographics. Here in bench research, it's the sort of major components and compounds used in this study. And I think we're going to skip this one. This is my last slide. We can just talk about this. So the results section, what's your takeaway? What have you gotten from what we rushed a little bit through the results section more than the method section because we're running a little bit close to the time. But any thoughts on like, oh wow, this is interesting about the results section, or I haven't thought about this, or yes, that's what I do all the time. Any thoughts, comments, questions?
I just want to ask about the comment on the table. Is there a rule like to write the comment before the table or after it, or
Oh, you mean like they say this? Oh, upsala. So the precursor and product and Isabell's collision were presented in table 1, or if you could say something like blah 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 means blah blah blah, and then have a parentheses table 1. Does that get at your question, Maha?
Or to put the table first and then to put the comment?
Oh, that is really just, so the way that I've organized it here, the table comes second. Where the table comes really depends on the layout of the article. So sometimes the table will come before the text, just based on the layout of the journal. That's not something that you control. But somebody might see table 1 before they read something about table 1, but it's really not going to mean anything until they read about what you say about table 1, if that makes any sense. So the way the tables are going to be presented in your printed version of your article really is subject to the actual author. If you're presenting, let's say, trying to think in what context, like let's say when you're submitting a manuscript to an author, you have your tables and figures usually in a separate document. Is that right, Henry? Usually it's in a separate file or at the end. It also depends on the journal, but you don't really have to worry where you put your table first or after you write about it. That will be something determined by the publisher. Good question, though, yeah. So here it happens, I put it on the bottom because this is the way I organized it. I would find it more logical to see the table, to read about it and then see the table, but it's usually simultaneous or close by. Like sometimes, I don't know if you have this in textbooks, especially, you're like, see table 1, and you got to, go like 4 pages later, there's table 1. You're like, what is going on? So if they're close to each other, that's the ideal setting. So again, this is where methods and results are kind of similar. Both subheadings are very useful in both. They both use past tense. Like you see this, the precursor. Well, the only difference is you use present tense when you talk about how data are presented. Like they are presented in table 1. But when you write about the actual results, they preferred this. This is past tense, right? They ranged. They were. So it's all past tense when you're describing the actual results. Survey participants responded, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So here are the resources, and so here are the Ainsley ones. So there is the, here's the link. Oh, I might have to put the link in there. I'll do that before I send it to Henry, because I have a link for all the, for this one as well. For all the articles, so I'll add that to it. There's some other things here. There's 2 websites by Barbara Gastel. She's written a book with somebody else whose name I'm blanking on, sort of a standard on how to write a scientific paper. So these are kind of just another, set of PowerPoints to look at, some of the information that we see on my PowerPoint slides as well, but just, to look at for some additional information. There is this really nice video by Editage. Editage is a for-profit editing company for scientists, but they have a lot of great free resources. I really like their work, and they have a step-by-step guide to formatting tables and figures in your manuscript, because I didn't go over that, but there's a certain art to, to formatting them. For most publishers tend to use the same guidelines, but then, it's just like with citations, they might do something totally different. You always follow what the journal says, but here it gives you general basic conventions for that. Same thing for Springer, big publisher, especially in the sciences, on figures and tables. And then here's the link to the article by Hirche on preparing and publishing a scientific manuscript. So it's, including the methods and results sections. If you want to take a look at that, you have the DOI here. And then there is this Equator network, and that's where you can find some of these checklists for the different study types as well. Like what to show you, CORAC and Prisma. Prisma is for systematic reviews and so on. So those are the resources. You can then, kind of experiment and kind of look around those as well. And again, I'm a big fan of these Ainsley articles. I'll add the link to where you can find all 14 of them, because they all deal with each of the sections that we're covering. But he also has written a few on more general issues around scientific writing. And that's it from me, folks. I'm going to stop sharing here and see if I get my camera back on. Yeah, somehow Zoom is unable to detect my camera. I don't know what the heck. Let me see if I can take it in and out. But are there any questions, comments, thoughts while I try to figure out my technological IT situation here with this stuff? Ugh, so annoying.
Well, one thing I want to say is that one way to enhance your writing ability and to see, I mean, there's different styles of writing a paper, and you should adapt your own style for sure. But one way to see different styles and different choice of words and ways of presenting data and writing introduction section and discussion section is to read other papers, okay? But not only to read other papers, but to read other papers with a mindset of what is the form in which this paper is being presented. What's the structure? I mean, forget about the content, okay, though the content is important, but when you read other published papers, read with a mindset of looking at the structure. Because when we usually read, we pass by that. So the next time, or the next several times, or for the rest of your life, when you read scientific papers, look at how someone uses active and passive, and see how that grabs you. Look at the words they use, and see if that grabs you. And if you resonate with the use of those words, you may not, which is fine. But if you read different papers, different writing styles, blah, 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 and see which ones you like and adapt it. That's not considered plagiarism if you adapt someone's structure.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, the first time I took a writing course, we did more reading than writing. Okay, and looking at good writers, and the writers included, people like Woody Allen and Martin Luther King, and Bob Dylan, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I even found that reading the sports pages was helpful. I always thought sports writers, right? I mean, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, they're very good.
They are really good at writing. But having said that, don't, that Egyptian newspaper. What's the name of that? I can't remember.
أخبار
What's that?
الأخبار
I'm sorry?
الأهرام
Yeah,
الأخبار
Rom. Yeah.
الأهرام yeah pyramids.
Yeah. Don't read that paper.
It's a certain Drino, yeah.
No, we have versions of it in English and in French.
I know. Well, I don't know about the French version, but the English version, if you want, I'm not going to include this in the recording, but if you want an example of bad writing, that's the place to go. All right.
Well, one of my challenges in the States, I was reading always Reader Digest, and it was really difficult for me to understand it. It was really hard. I don't know why,
Yeah,
but
the
Reader
Reader's
Digest
Digest.
is perfect.
Yeah, Reader is a good. It's actually, I recommend it to all folks when they like who are multilingual learners of English, who are like, what should I read on a regular basis? That's actually pretty good. And see, the tough part is also with reading some popular writing or like newspapers or journals, is that it's not just language, but it's cultural knowledge. It's certain references to like there's people love baseball, not even sports writers, baseball references. And the first time I was like, what does that mean? You just don't know unless you know baseball. And if you're not a US American, chances are, or I think the Japanese love baseball too. From Europe, we're like, baseball, what's that? We're all about soccer, you know what I mean? So it's the same thing if you were, so these analogies and certain phrases come from cultural context as well that will, can make it challenging if you're not very familiar with that or just starting to be familiar with it. So one of the things that we can do, Henry, next week when we look at intro and discussion sections, I have an exercise that I have my students do in my class. I call it, for the introduction section, I call it a skeleton introduction. So what it is, and I'll send the handout to you sometime today so you guys can take a look at it. And if you want to play around with it for next week, over your holidays, I know there's a holiday coming up for you all. I'm very happy for you. But if we can do it together as well. It's basically, I've taken certain skeleton phrases from certain introductions myself and from some other books that I've worked with over the years, certain phrases like, we found that, as an example. And you can just sort of plug in your content in there and you'll end up with having a some sort of fundamental building block for introduction. And my students have to do it on like a topic they choose. And they always love the exercise. And at first they're like, what the heck is this? But then they're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. So we can take a look at that because it's basically what Henry is asking you to do with other people's work. Use some of the like, oh, this phrase sounds really good. And previously research has examined that. That's a great phrase that you can use if you like that phrase. It's not the greatest phrase, I just came up with it. There's better phrases, but just as an example. So we can do some work with that because I think it works for the introduction section. It works like a charm. It's a little harder to do in the discussion section, but even there are certain phrases that we'll take a look at with some of the examples, because for intro and discussion, we're actually going to take a look at some sample introductions and some sample discussions, including your article, Henry, on the research misconduct in the Middle East that I've used in every workshop ever for the past 2 years.
Is that right?
So you're making your rounds.
Royalties.
Whatever. It wouldn't come to you, they would go to the journal anyway.
Oh,
I
yeah,
always
that's
properly
right,
cite
yeah.
you.
Right.
Royalties, please. So anyway, so that's what we're going to do next week. So I'll get this material ready and send it to you today, Henry, so you can forward it to Phil.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Great.
Good.
This is great. All right.
Super.
Great. All right. So we'll reconvene at noon. All right.
Sounds good. Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful
good.
holiday. I'll see you next week. It's great meeting you all. I look
Thanks,
forward to
Isabell.
next week. Bye, Henry. Always good to see you.
All right.
Bye.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to end the meeting for all, Henry. Is that okay? Since I'm the host.
Oh, no, I'm going to claim back the host.
Okay, claim back the host. Claim
Yeah,
it back.
right. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Let me do that before I log off because it might be hard to do when I'm off.
Oh, no, I'm doing it.
Yeah, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I
Super.
got it back.
And you're the host now. Very good. See you later, Henry.
All right. See you.
Bye.
Bye.